All right, everyone. Hello, YouTube. Hello, LinkedIn. Hello, Internet. Welcome back to Opinionated Collective. So this week we have one of two special guests. This week I invited someone with a much different outlook on the gender discussion that Elizabeth, myself, and Justin were having about a week ago, and thought we should shake it up a little bit. So our guest today is actually Dr. Lisa Holland, who I believe, if I'm correct, you're originally from New York, correct?
Yes, but I've been down in Charlotte, North Carolina since 2004. So I've got a nice split of the North and the South at this point.
So a little about her from what I saw on her LinkedIn profile. I will call you a multiple entrepreneur, if that's okay, since it would happen to be on the internet. But what I noticed on your profile early in your career is you were a doctor of physical therapy first, correct?
Yeah, I started off in sports medicine, athletic training, and then combined that with my clinical work and healthcare was in physical therapy.
So this isn't pick your brains, but I'll just ask you a very short question. Did the doctor of physical therapy kind of give you more of a background toward being in clinical healthcare? Or like a training ground? I have a friend who wanted to be a physician's assistant, so he decided to do a paramedic, and now he's in certification, and now he's an EMT. No, correction. He started as an EMT, and now he's a paramedic.
Well, I moved into physical therapy before there actually was a doctorate, and then I went up a level to do the highest advanced level as the clinical doctorate. And what that really did was allow there to be a little bit more distinction for autonomous practice, because when I had started practice, certain states were a little bit more governed by physicians. So yes, I guess the answer to your question is yes. More autonomy.
I hear her.
Okay, I do.
Hey, Elizabeth, are you there? Justin,
I don't see her on.
All right.
I do see her, but I don't see a screen. I see on the list, there's an audio.
Good enough. You there, Elizabeth?
I wonder what's happening now.
It might be the computer, but it's fine because we started recording, so we'll just continue. All right? I wonder, is it me or is it her? Well, anyway. All right, so
it looks like her audio is not on. It looks like it's on mute. So I don't know if anybody has
Justin,
the power.
type to her about the audio. Justin, I think that's on your end. I wonder if it's because we have 4 people.
I mean, I've run these with many people. I did my owning the evolving.
Yeah, I can imagine. So. I'm sure it's not the amount of people. It's probably the server, right? Because Zoom is tricky.
Sometimes it depends on your internet speed in terms of coming in, but I don't know why she's not picking up on us, because I see her on the list of participants, but I don't see her. I think I don't see her because I might have my I have my settings on that I don't see anybody coming in, just audio. So it looks like she might be coming in on her phone as opposed to her computer.
I'm using a phone also, but I managed to be clear.
Oh, here she is. Here she is.
Okay. All right. So I see something. Anyway, finish what you were saying, and we'll
So yeah, I mean, the doctor of physical therapy. Again, I was a more independent practitioner to begin with, and I went into direct access type of care as a primary care practitioner as soon as I moved to North Carolina. So I wasn't really in that debate, but overall, the doctorate level was supposed to give us more autonomy in the more corporate healthcare settings.
Something I would debate, or something we'll probably debate for another episode, for a completely different episode of this, which is on the healthcare system. Because unfortunately, I have my own views of how much of a mess the United States system is.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty obvious view. I'm
We know.
sure.
Most outsiders will even agree that it's a problem. So I'm not sure what's going on with her, but anyway, I'm just going to basically take one of my favorite YouTubers' sentiments on this, and I'm going to basically say, now that we've had a little bit of an introduction to Dr. Holland today, let's get into it. All right. So first thing I think we could bring up as a group today would be everyone's thoughts on the MGTOW movement and the Me Too movement. To preface this, the original Me Too movement was started back around 2018 as kind of a protest to the, what I would like to call, appointment of a Supreme Court justice that not too many people like to this day, and still don't like, because he just did something very controversial. And then in a way, I would say the Me Too movement started out as a positive movement, but what I would say is over time with certain personalities, I think it lost some of what the original message was. What do you two think?
You want to start, Justin, or you want me to take that?
Let's start with Justin. What do you think?
You're muted, Justin.
I believe the original intent of the Me Too movement was supposed to be empowering women to speak up against whoever is causing whatever issues is being caused, whether it's sexual violence, whether it was harassment, whether it's whatever it may be that's causing whatever issues that were being caused. I think the Me Too movement gave those women a voice, a strong voice in the matter. However, I think over time, like all other movements, somewhere along the line, it got lost in the meaning. I mean, it got lost, at least partially.
All right.
As strong as it is today as it was back then.
I think back then it did have a little more meaning. However, I felt the media, over both medias, this is another episode as well, I think both medias completely took it to another stage that it didn't really need to. Now, I would like to get your thoughts on this, Lisa.
Yeah, I think the Me Too movement was to give voice, like Justin said, to speak out, to not be quiet anymore, and to cause there to be a ripple effect. But I think any movement starts with a catalytic force, and then it's up to whoever's in the movement to kind of direct where that power that's coming from within to speak up, it becomes a force against or towards or with. And that kind of is where it gets screwy depending on who's involved. Now, the problem with everything that we seem to do, now even more so, is that everything's a show. Everything is entertainment. And when you start getting vested interests in making it a commodity, the movement a commodity, then the news in general is entertainment now. Like, it's not like it's really, everybody can get information everywhere else. We're not really turning into the news for information anymore. So it's going to be taken on and become a circus, you know? So, and I don't think Me Too was ever supposed to be something that like keeps going. I think it was to speak up and then become its own force out of the empowerment. You know, force and power are two different things. Out of the inner empowerment of the people that were going to be part of that, it was supposed to help be against any sort of oppressive or threatening perceived threats. So I think, and I think it was effective for that. I don't think we have a Me Too movement right now. And I don't think that's the point. Like, we don't have a Me Too movement right now. It did its work. What we have right now is what the Me Too movement came about for, was thinking that might happen because of the consequences of how things were running and certain people being appointed. It was a more of a visionary, futuristic approach to what we're seeing right now. Just the same way as, you know, the movements in the 60s and you know, like they're just futuristic and visionary catalysts. But where we take it as a society depends on the context and we're living in.
So my problem with what, and I'm going to get to MGTOW in a second. So my problem with the movement, unfortunately, was because now today, you spoke about something, because Justin and I both, you know, went over the period of the 60s in history class. I don't think we lived it. I'm pretty sure you at least saw it on TV with your own eyes. Am I correct?
Yeah, I wasn't born until 72. So I was, you know, I'm that last 50 years of feminism. So you know, all of that catalyst of again, civil rights. It's all a conversation about humanity, and so everything's going to pop up. But yes,
So,
I saw that. I mean, there's the whole thing with drugs and psychedelics and everything that came out of that. That there's a lot of politics. Again, that's entertainment. And
that's what I was about to get to, because unfortunately my problem with it, and especially now, is the difference between when you were growing up and when we're growing up now, and when he and I are adults now, including yourself and Elizabeth. Oh, and by the way, there's an issue on her end, so it's just going to be the three of us.
okay.
We'll do something else. We'll do another topic another time with the four of you when she gets that issue worked out. The issue today is, unfortunately, it's a 24-hour news cycle. So unfortunately now, the MGTOW movement came out of this during a 24-hour news cycle as kind of a counter movement to basically suggest that men should also have a voice as well, because my issue with the Me Too movement was as follows. Basically, it turned into an excuse for women to now bash men, which I don't think was productive for the movement at all, to just continually bash men, whether, you know, you're in certain positions, which in this case was the Supreme Court, or, you know, executives, or even lower level, because not every, you know, man is going to be an executive, as you've experienced in healthcare. Not every man is going to be in a management position. I'll give you an example. In the last 16 to 17 years, I've only worked nothing but entry-level jobs. This was between retail, customer service, you know, interning in nonprofit, and only now am I on my second role in healthcare, you know, still at sort of an entry level, but mostly with a customer service, whatchamacallit. So sometimes when I look at how both movements today were, what I see, unfortunately, is a lot of men are now having to defend themselves, when not all of us are in those positions or could be blamed or should be blamed for, you know, for our peers on what's going on. That's just.
Yeah, I fully appreciate what you're saying, but I think that you're confusing feminism with the Me Too movement.
Yeah,
I think
you are.
You might be right, because I always felt, you know, what your brand of feminism and today's feminism are two completely different things. I could be wrong, but if you would be willing to, help me understand, I'm open to listen.
Well, you know, feminism in terms of, you know, the isms, all the isms, right? Yeah. Racism, genderism, feminism, communism, all the isms, right? What we're doing is fusing the concept of humanitarian core values, belief systems with politics. That's what basically that is. And then that equals some sort of ism. So like feminism in itself, you know, that was about the feminine representation of human beingness. And so the first wave was, you know, back in, you know, with the suffrage movement, where it was just like, can we just be called humans and stop being, you know, treated like sheep? It was just a factor of being
allow
human.
allow the right to vote,
Well,
which was
it's
the
not
1920s.
I mean, but basically the conversation was treat me like a human because I'm not being treated like a human. It's the same conversation such as, you know, the Black Americans conversation in terms of you know, treat me with respect as another human being, not by the color of my skin. This just happened to be not by, you know, my body parts and my social function of producing, you know, creating the children while I, you know, getting inseminated and creating, I'm not cattle. Then in the 60s, into the 70s, it was very successful through the 70s up until Ronald Reagan came in with being a conversation about, now I would like to have equal power. And we all know that power in human culture has been trade, right? Money, right? Trade
Yeah.
of some sort. Sex, money, power, they're all kind of tied in together. And women and men have used all of that to gain leadership and supposed respect, or to get people who were scared and cowardly, and then they'd have control. So there's spectrums of that. So that was the second wave of just sort of getting people the ability to support themselves and have that power. Then the third wave was more in the 90s, and you had like the Spice Girls and the power, you know, girl power, and it was kind of a move to like this equality in terms
We were
of,
kids during the 90s, so I actually remember that.
yeah, so it was
And
more,
that was understandable. I actually appreciated being able to see, you know, some of that as a kid, because that's probably what I originally thought it should have been. I feel like I said today, I think the media just took it and ran with it.
well, I don't know if it was the media as much as just the whole entire concept. So we went from that, and which was just personal empowerment, to now we have intersectionality. And I think part of the issue right now that we're seeing is that it's very messy, because we're combining the whole gender equality with sexual equality, with you know, money equality, with, you know, and then on top of that, we've lost the equity conversation, which is what my conversation usually is because we are we are confusing as a society equality and oneness as equality as sameness. And so the point of the matter is, you know what? An African American man is not the same as an African American woman. An African American man is not the same as a white man. But that doesn't mean we're not all one human being. You know what I mean? And we're confusing that. If we could just get that. So what you're seeing is, in that confusion, Benjamin, is that there's some people who took the feminist movement, just like racism movements and genderism. There are some people that take on the victimization and remain the victim in that conversation. And there's some people who take on more of the creator, and not so much the victim, but literally the creator, you know, more of the visionary, more of the futurist. And the victims are staying in the past and trying to, you know, change things from a place where you can't change things and be in the past. So it's futile, and it's going to cause frustrations, and that's where it's very black and white thinking.
And that's, I think, the main problem that a lot of people are seeing nowadays, is because it's not just, it really comes down to our elected leaders and the power of media today. And now that everything is much more digital, you know, we have some people get their news from social media. Some people get their news from the traditional outlets. So, and unfortunately, like I said, 24-hour news cycles. So
it comes down to money, Benjamin.
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't come down to who's elected. Yeah, the people who are elected are the ones that are the richest ones. The laws that get passed are from the organizations pushing it, from the lobbyists. Like, for example,
Yep.
physical therapists have been in conflict with the AMA, the American Medical Association, forever, in terms of the doctors, the physician doctors, the MDs not wanting the PTs to be classified as primary care providers. Although
But they can be primary
they,
care
they
providers.
can, but the thing is with insurances, when you're in bed with the insurance companies,
Oh.
again, with the money, where's the money going? They have an agreement and
doctors.
they want to be paid
Yeah.
first.
Let
So
me
all-
just say
Doctors pay
something,
first, yeah.
since you're talking about insurance, and this is something that I've experienced as a patient. The thing that angers me is that certain medical groups don't want to accept, for example, Medicare. They'll take Medicare, but Medicaid, no one wants to touch it because it's government insurance. But the original design for Medicaid was really for people who were not making, good wages. For example, today you would put the part-time minimum wage worker, if they're living on their own, as somebody who needs something like Medicaid, but not too many doctors want to take it. It's like, so where does that leave me with options? Since you're on the topic of insurance, though I'm
well,
a medic.
I mean, it's off topic of what we're talking about, but it's this, again, it's all down to money. I can tell you very much as a practitioner, the problem with taking Medicaid and Medicare is that the procedures for me to submit information to them to get paid, first of all, they don't listen to anything you say, so they really don't care what your opinion is about the patient. They have protocols. They decide what they're going to pay before they even see you based on your diagnosis. It doesn't matter if you have a problem with communicating with me or so-and-so doesn't, and it takes longer in their therapy, and they don't care. And then the practitioner is doing a lot more work, and then they're getting paid less than other insurances will pay. So the trade-off ends up being, should I go out of business because of the system? Because then I cannot take care of anyone.
Exactly.
All
That's
right.
precisely.
I can agree with that. So now back on topic. Let's talk about the most recent Me Too example, and that was the Johnny Depp Amber Heard very high profile court case.
Why do you call that a Me Too thing?
I think it was more because with Amber Heard, it was hard to determine when reading up on her, was that her actual personality, or was she, taking an idea of feminism and then doing something else?
I think she was just are you talking about just in terms of like abuse?
Yes.
But that's like not Me Too. Abuse, speaking of abuse, it's not the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement was telling women to speak up about anything, pay equality, gender stuff,
whatever issue you have,
whatever issue you're having, take it out of just keeping it inside you, take it out of just the women's circles, take it out of just quietly talking to somebody, your priest, your partner or whatever, and we're going to bring it out into the public. So, the Me Too movement was to give the empowerment to the people, whoever wants to be on that, to do that, particularly for, women in general, but it could be anybody who's just the same thing. If you're talking about being on the spectrum, and that whole thing would come out of the same thing, of the idea of like the catalyst of like not keeping it quiet and speaking up. And so a lot of the online conversations like this, to be perfectly honest, were probably catalyzed by the Me Too movement. Now, Amber and that whole issue, again, entertainment, celebrity gossip, something to distract, whatever. And I think in that case, we're just looking at somebody who really thought they could ride the waves of that sentiment. Again, yes, in the cases of domestic violence, because of the statistics and because of the cultures and things like that, men tend to not be highlighted as being violent, having domestic violence against them as much as women. And so, yes, she was going to play that out towards her advantage, like every single person who goes to court and tries to put strategy. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but women like that who do take advantage, like it was obvious she was not as abused in the way
Or
of
she wasn't as
unfairness.
believable, because that's the other thing, since you mentioned the court systems, because in an interesting way, when my father went through 2 divorces.
Mhm.
So this is a little bit of a story. Later on in life, I realized it was more of an issue with his upbringing and personality, but to see him go through it twice, where my mother had, legitimate arguments. As for the second marriage, which was my brother and sister, and this is my, their step siblings, she's going to be getting married in October, and I'll be attending that wedding with her mother, who dragged my father and me to family court in 2003 for something that was completely stupid to begin with. But I was caught in the middle, and sometimes I feel certain types of women, even just Amber, they try to use the legal system to their advantage, where
Yes, but
it's not always
men
right.
have been doing that for a long time too, because when they held,
Right.
whoever holds the power is going to be doing that, Benjamin.
Yep.
Like for like, I can tell you, having just gone through divorce, I'm an intelligent woman, very independent, have a career, degrees or whatever. I was screwed by the system because it favors whoever is the one that,
Can get a better
can get the better lawyer, or just
Yeah.
even put in the like
The right
whoever has the better
argument.
case, the better, whoever
the
is
better
willing to go the
arguments.
distance.
So your ex had a better case, would you say?
Well, I just think in general, like, it's not even that, like, through the divorce it was fine, but I'm just saying, like things that were difficult were just laws, like, that just while you're married, just certain things women give up. Like, it was a pain in the neck. I had to change my name legally. I had to do all this stuff just to get other stuff done that he doesn't have to do. I had to pay for this and that to do that sort of, like, there's a lot of extra things that, you don't, I mean, I'm only one generation away from my mother used to have my father co-sign in order to get herself a loan.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
only that far away from that.
Yeah.
Like, that was
Yeah.
just the law.
Today,
Yeah.
my
I ain't
generation,
speak on my mother. I mean,
today, even my generation,
Mhm.
though, this generation, some of us may have to have our parents co-sign to help us even buy a house.
Mhm.
I
Yes.
know this is
Yeah.
off issue, but millennials are having to do this because it's
Right.
just too difficult to buy a house, on your own these
Well,
days.
that's going to be the case then, Benjamin, because if you ever go to court
Yeah.
and whoever's name is on that thing is liable, and it'll screw them, or they'll take advantage of it.
Exactly.
And I had a bad
Justin agreed.
experience,
Exactly.
with family court because of his second marriage. Years later, I, forgave him and realized, look, I was caught in the middle. It was a bad situation. It was what it was. I was upset about it, because it was my final year of high school, and maybe that's why I had a hard time letting go of it, because there was a lot of probable upset and anger at my end when I was much younger than it is now.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, it's your view. Again, what I said earlier, right? It's the context in which it's happening. It might not, I mean, honestly, that's what the human condition is. The reason we have dis-ease in anything, in our body, in our relationships, in our mind, in our whatever, is the fact that we can't seem to really understand that it is, we see the world how we are. And how
Yep.
we are is in the context of how, and if it just happens to be that somebody gives me an excuse to be more pissed off because I'm brown girl and not white girl, if I feel like I'm in the mood to take it, maybe I'll take that and I'll use that, but that's me being unhealthy.
Well, you can imagine, for me being on the spectrum, how I'm not going to use the word annoying, but how tiring it becomes at times to have to continue to explain this to people who either haven't had an autistic relative, an autistic child, or they've been around somebody at work who it learns a lot differently. And it's not exactly I would never try to educate a person on it. I would rather just sit there and try to explain, look, you learn this way, I learn this way. It might take me a few more minutes than you to be able to fully understand because, this person might be in the neurotypical category, whereas, it takes me a few extra minutes to try to understand something.
Well, then you'll appreciate the whole feminism conversation in general is really about the fact that, to be perfectly honest, if we were going to classify, because everyone's on the spectrum, everyone's on a spectrum of color, a spectrum of sexuality, a spectrum of what energetics they use in their power, whether they lead with the feminine or lead with the masculine. But the reality is that the big problem is that we, again, with the equality, men's and women's equality, is that we don't seem to understand that technically to a man-centric world, which is what we have right now, most of all of the Western world, which is pretty much, most of where the power is, right? Like all of where the power is a man-centric made world. So I want you to relate to, in your frustration of trying to be in a neurotypical world, how frustrating that is. That's how women feel, because we're basically neurodivergent to the man-centric world. Do you understand?
Yes.
We are literally that way. So it makes it difficult when we always have to explain this and that. And we always have to explain. And we're like, why can't you get it? Like, and on top of it, then you have that we've moved into a lot of women kind of just deciding, which maybe a lot of, neurodivergent people do as well, as maybe how much can I just fit in the box, instead of me trying to explain and be different and wait for things to change to be including me. Let me just try to fit in this damn box as much as possible and make it work. Well, that's what a bunch of women did when they went out to the workforce, and they just said, you know what, let me just figure out. And the reason they have different jobs is because that was what was available, just like to you, when people don't understand, to make a neurodivergent, inclusive type of world, that it's going to make you be in certain job levels that maybe you have genius to be outside of, but because of the way it's situated, you don't have the availability. That's exactly what women have been having the problem with. And so when it seems like we're against men, it's not all women. It's just that we are very tired as well. Is when we post something, you're going to get those people. The same thing as when you post, that they probably, like, the same people, they're just more likely to post on a woman's thing than probably post on yours, because they probably don't have the guts to post and say something to you about, like, why do we, like, to say something to the fact that it demonstrates you're not the same neurological profile as them. But they have no problem, some people, doing that with women. And so that's what you see, but it's not everybody. And like I said, there's a sector of people who are victims, and they take on a victim mentality with everything. And then there's a sector of people who are growth minded, and they take on a creator mentality. And I think we need to move all of these conversations to creator mentalities, but unfortunately only 4 to 6% of human beings are ones that want to actually think at that level.
Before I touch on James Damore in the Google Echo Chamber, one thing I did want to mention to both of you is, I think at the very least here in the States, more women's rights have become recognized, because up until the 21st century, Saudi Arabian women, or even women, and for whatever reason, you can bring this up in this country as well. Women have more rights in this country than a country like Saudi Arabia or Somalia. And Saudi Arabia, let's be honest, when were they finally granted the right to drive? Last decade by Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, who has his own issues, but at the very minimum, he recognized that women were of key importance to Saudi Arabian society.
Right.
Now, that actually said something that he was willing to change decades of, how his father's generation and generations before that within most of the Arab Middle East looked at women. They looked at women as basically property or less.
Which is where we were before the right to vote.
Right. And that's what I mean. You can update economies like, Saudi Arabia, you can update Qatar, you can update the United Arab Emirates, but the issue is their religious. Well, okay, not even religious. Basically, it's a theocratic system over there, from private businesses to the government. And, it's always the same people basically making these rules because they adhere to strict Sharia laws. So I would say the United States has come a lot further in at least recognizing women's rights than Saudi Arabia did when last decade
Well, it's
they
just
got the right.
it's just humanistic rights.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's the basic human rights to be you,
Drive a
and
car,
to
be
have a voice
yourself,
in your own
express
country,
yourself.
and to essentially at least participate in the economy without some else lording over you and saying, hey, you need my permission, or you need some other person's permission to do the basic things.
And also it's the women themselves. Again, also, like, again, part of it is you have to also not give away your power, or be
That too.
in a space where you are generating enough courage to, quite frankly, be persecuted, possibly executed in the process of it. So again, men are a little bit more protected. Adults
Yeah.
versus children are a little bit more protected. White people versus black people and brown people are a little more protected. So when somebody of the minority conversation brings something up, there's a level of courage that has to build up, not just consciousness. We all know how we should
We
be
all know.
behaving.
Yeah.
It's just who has the courage to buck the system.
Well,
Exactly.
I can speak for myself, and I bring these things up myself as well among peers, but in terms of just platforms these days, yeah, you're right. Not many people, unfortunately, want to come out of their little world. It's not just, with technology, it's probably just more, I don't even know what to say at this point, because I knew someone who we no longer speak, and he has literally a lot of prejudiced views. And also it's how he views women. For example, he felt women shouldn't be in leadership positions, where I would tend to disagree with him and say, that sounds like your problem. Because, what's wrong with a woman being in a leadership position?
I mean, it all goes back to kind of how you interpreted the stories you heard anyway, and what you were conditioned to
Right.
believe. Because to be perfectly honest, right now I'm kind of like, if we're going to go back to the Bible being the issue in terms of men and women, with a lot of like the Bible and stuff like that is a big thing. I'm going to say, you know what? To be perfectly honest, Adam watched Eve do it and didn't say a damn thing. So maybe he should have spoken up if he didn't want her eating the
Right.
damn apple. And
The
also,
Bible is
There you
open
go.
to people's interpretation.
that's what I'm saying. So like when you
Right.
literally, there's a whole entire culture that there's a whole entire just when you're talking about these types of cultural inequalities, and how it all goes down to the value of whatever. Like there is a big story in the Christian faith that Eve, the woman, caused problems and got them out of, you know what I mean? But that precursor for thousands of years is going to, meanwhile, I'm like, yeah, or we can be like, do you really think she'd be punished with literally the only human to be able, like God, to create? Why would he give her a period, menstrual cycle, to punish her? Doesn't that like give her a superpower? Like, are we really thinking about it? Like, so it's how you're interpreting it. So, I mean, everything you're saying is true. And like you said, people don't necessarily, it's not that they don't want to come out with their views. It's that they only want to come out with their views where they can be in their own circles that agree with them. Because you are going to be persecuted or pushed back. For example, my talk is a lot on the she-her conversation. I am not anti they, them, or he, him. But I happen to want to talk about that end of the spectrum because personally, I don't think we've ever actually demonstrated her leadership. I think we've taken in the box, like I explained before, and we did as best as we could. And then eventually we added some lipstick and high heels and a prettier suit. But for the most part, I've been playing a guy's game. I haven't really seen female-centric, woman-centric, feminine-centric, cis-centric examples. That doesn't mean I'm against a different perspective. It just means that if you're going to show me a black crayon and a white crayon and then show me gray, you're going to show me on a piece of paper how I can make gray. And if I put a little more white, then I have this color gray. And if I put a little more black, then I can understand that very easily. But if you're never going to show me black and white crayons and you're just going to show me 5 shades of gray and tell me they're all gray, and I never saw black and white crayons, it's going to be a lot harder for me to accept.
So I want to cherry pick off a point that you made, and it's actually probably a good one, because we're going to talk about I'm going to leeway into something. Do you feel within the healthcare system that there are at least more even leadership roles for women, or do you still feel it's male dominated? Because when you look at the clinical setting, at least what I've been working with, most of my supervisors happen to be resident nurses.
Well, women do fine getting into middle management. And in the hospital system, all the clinicians are middle management. It's getting them out of middle management into upper management. That's a big leap. And in that sector, you will not find a lot of women.
So you still feel like I do, that it's good to at least have the women in middle management, but it would be more beneficial to have them at the top.
Well, the problem is they're not the decision makers. They're the managers.
Well, yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah.
And
so,
that's, I mean, it would be nice to see,
Yeah.
it would be nice to see more women leaders at the top on the executive boards. But yeah, unfortunately, that would mean some men would have to want to give up their board positions, and most men probably are not going to want to do that at this point in their lives.
right.
Maybe in another generation or two.
And also that some women that are there would have to make more room for other women too. Unfortunately, the culture is there's one seat. There's one seat.
Yes.
And so, and then what they're doing is, let's give it to the brown or black woman, because then we tick off 2 boxes at that point.
So
Right,
basically the diversity box checklist, because that's the entire argument on the Google echo chamber.
Right.
So that, here was my thing with it. James Damore wrote a very controversial letter, which I'm going to say was probably, the fact that it got leaked wasn't good for him to begin with anyway. How Google treated it, unfortunately, I don't think was very professional of them either, because they basically demonized him for raising some, what he viewed in his mind as decisions that women make, within, what roles do they seek, whether it's in work or what they're doing in terms of their career. He may have had some points, but the way he presented it is unfortunately why he ended up getting fired in the first place, because it got him in trouble with top management, obviously. Just from the fact of being a software engineer. And then he went on to try to sue them, which, let's be honest, most people probably knew he was going to have to drop the lawsuit eventually anyway, because that's a large company. So what were your thoughts on the letter that he penned, known as the echo chamber? And also, by the way, he's neurodiverse. So, most of the time neurodiverse, most people just don't always understand what we're saying and take it the wrong way.
Well, I mean, his letter versus anyone's, same conversation. And sometimes I get into this as well, as I think he was speaking to the fact of that, again, that sameness and oneness kind of conversation. And he was seeing different qualities and possibly, quite possibly, different levels of skill, because there is this is where the equity conversation comes in versus equality. You can give me the same access But if it's way harder for me to do my job and utilize that access, then that puts me at a disadvantage in looking
Yeah.
at performance. And there might
Yep.
be a misunderstanding because of like what I call code flexing, or our communication styles, or our neurodivergency between men and women, to understand and value certain things we bring into certain roles. So for example, someplace like Google or a tech world in general or whatever, it's a certain mindset of engineering mindset, a certain that many culturally boys are sort of
Engineers, analysts. It's basically engineers and analysts. And
Right,
what you'll
that-
see more in the roles that the women take up are going to be recruiters.
well, that they take up or that they're hired for.
They're hired for.
Exactly. So the thing is that whether, you know,
Mm.
do you give me equal
Mm.
access? And then if you give me equal access, do you appreciate equity? And, you know, and my ability to function in that way. It's in the same thing as with you, with like any neurodivergent type of, like, if you're going to give me a test and I have let's say an auditory processing problem, are you giving me an accommodation so that when I'm taking that test, my makeup
Right.
is not the issue? It's my, you know, so if you're going to give me an entrance exam to decide my level at Google, have you taken into effect, is that given in a core values questionnaire or whatever that appreciates that I'm a woman versus a man, or culturalized in this versus that? Now,
Right.
Speaking of with those tests and accommodations, guess what? Who do you think needs accommodations, and why do you think I'm weeded out most of the times, literally because of what
Yeah.
you just
Well,
said?
do you
Those
need accommodations? Do you need accommodations, or do we need
I
to
use
change the way that we are presenting the whole entire system? Like, that's
Number
where we're
two.
at.
Number two, change the way the system is presented for somebody like me. Stop trying to default to
Agreed.
what worked in the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century, and both me and Justin have a mindset very similar to
Well,
you.
that's all.
which is-
That's the same exact thing women are saying. Look, here's the thing.
Exactly.
You don't have a uterus, and until you do and can bear a baby, then you're going to have to try to
What
maybe
can-
get some childcare in this damn
Okay.
place.
Yep. Exactly.
Childcare
Yeah.
in the United States of America got ruined by capitalism, but
I'm
that's a separate issue entirely.
In
because
general, I'm just
childcare
saying.
In
shouldn't
general.
be that expensive.
It shouldn't be that expensive, but also we shouldn't have to have every mother out working for the first couple years of their child's life if
No.
we have research
Right,
that
wow.
shows that that's an important bonding that will determine that child's psychosocial and physical health outcomes for the lifetime of them. We have research that shows that, but it doesn't show in our quality. And America is one of the worst maternal health supporting nations,
Yeah.
although it's one of the richest. So this is what
Yep.
this
Yep.
is why men might get some pushback, that their priorities are not actually following science and are not actually being very fair, and are in a mindset it's advantageous for them to keep the
Yep.
women home
Yeah.
because it works better for their families. They don't necessarily want it. It's advantageous for a hospital system to not teach all of its doctors nutrition and exercise science and all of this, because you know what? They make money out of births and death. And if you make women be able to give birth on their own at home, like they used to for thousands of years again, and if you give them support for being old and healthy and not dying as fast, or dying at home, going to sleep like it used to be, then you really make people, you're going to kill their business. This is the reality in corporate America.
Yeah.
If you put all the women in, let me tell you something. They are problem solvers. They go in where they're not even worried if somebody asks them to. It's just our nature. There's a lot of stuff that would not be going on that they like going on. And that's the big problem.
So backroom deals would be one thing.
Yeah.
Backroom deals, expression, but basically,
I'm just saying, this has been in operation. Corporate, political ties, money, sex, power just works differently in a woman-centric circle versus a men-centric circle. I'm not saying one's right versus wrong. I'm just saying, let's just look at how it's worked out when there's been an imbalance.
oh yeah, no, that
And
is
it's not
something you will find
who's
that
in
I agree
charge.
with.
It's not who's in charge though, guys, because when it used to work at home when women had a certain role and it might have seemed subservient to men, but what it was submissive to certain things because they got something that they liked out of it. But when you're going to have a bunch of men who do not guarantee they're going to be faithful to you, do not guarantee they're going to support you for the rest of your life, walk out on you and this and that, then you know what? I got to protect my assets more than just taking care of your kids.
Yeah.
Which is understandable.
I'm just saying, it's a core values issue. It's not a man-woman thing. It's just that it's a power versus force, and the force, and it's a human condition issue. And unfortunately, humans who are not working on their personal development and to a level of spiritual development, which is not anything to do with religion, it's about me and something bigger, like me contributing to something bigger and knowing myself intimately. If I don't know that, who am I bringing into relationship? Who am I bringing into leadership? If you go and give me $1 million, like you see these kids that are 18 years old and they get $1 million contracts to be such and such NBA player or whatever, they ruin themselves. Why? Because
they don't know how to manage they don't know how to manage the money.
Just,
that's been the biggest
it's the context. It's the context. Equality was great. It's the context wasn't there. And all I'm saying is if we could just focus on the context here, creating societies where it was understanding that not everybody's the same, but that we're all one human being and we all got to live here. Like, it's very simple. The problem is, like I said, 96% or so, 94% of the people, they don't want to think. I just tell me what to do. I'm going to keep doing it. And when I do it, then I'm going to get this. It's just easy.
And I agree with you. Now that
it's a formula. It's like a formula.
Right. It's a formula.
Now that
right,
Justin? So now that we have a few minutes left, first and foremost, I'm glad we could all have this conversation, and this was a great conversation to be able to have today.
Thank you.
I'm grateful that you came on today and were able to also help me and him better understand. I do have a better understanding as well after you've been on today, just in terms of some of the things that we've discussed. And one thing I wanted to say when you mentioned personal development, what do you think this project is for me right now? This is another way. It's not just, it's not just me trying to build something for myself, but it's also part of the personal development. It's also part of the personal development category, because in some ways it's building other skills, as my own mother would put it, in a way that I might not learn in a degree program. Not that a degree program isn't useful, but the stuff that I'm learning through this can, eventually be going on a resume, or it grows into something else. So in that aspect, this is the personal development category. And you're right, a lot of people just stop developing themselves because for whatever reason.
It's true. It's true.
Last thing I'm going to say, the person that I mentioned earlier is somebody that I knew since kindergarten. Part of the reason we stopped talking was as follows. He stopped personally developing himself. He was always angry. He blamed me for everything. He made, let's just say, not good statements about, what my learning disability and, function in society was. He would call me names, and why do you think he's no longer a part of my life? It just took me a little too long because I realized in developing myself, he didn't want to do it. He thinks he thinks what he's got is the best, that he has, but it really isn't. So I hope you all learned something today from our guest, Lisa Holland, and we're going to probably have her back very soon for something else, because she's definitely, she really came ready today, and I'm glad that we had her today. I hope you all learned something, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.